The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for being with us today for this Danielcode webinar. How's the volume, folks? Would you somebody please type in the question box that you can hear me all right? Everything good all over the world? There we are. Norbert's first as usual. Followed by Daryl over in, well, no longer in Mossman, but I know you're in that part of the world, mate. Well, great to hear from you, Daryl. And thank you, Ray, as well. Okay. So Norbert, I know, is up in the very cold northern country of Canada. And Daryl's in Australia. So if they can hear me, I guess everything's fine. And the rest of you are with us. So let's see. Thank you for being with us today. Adrian down in Adelaide. Albert's a tutorial guy. Andrew. Ben, he's a retired pro golfer who lives in North Carolina. And I don't know, I haven't found yet if Gig is with it. He is a man of golf, and they're not that far away from each other. I'll put them in touch. Hey, good to have you with us, Ben. Yes, tutorial for you on Monday, mate. Daryl, wonderful. Hope things are going well for you. Greg is a wealth manager and tutorial guy in Colorado Springs, and also now of Texas. So that's going to be interesting. Greg Palladini's with us. He's a tutorial guy. He's a wealth manager, very, very experienced trader who's just in the process of doing his second Danielcode tutorial. He joined us in 2015, did a tutorial, I think in California in 2016, and he's back with us again, and he's been very kindly sharing some of his discoveries he's been making in his journey through the Danielcode tutorial, particularly trading time, the wonderful The Next Frontier. Harold's with us. Harold's such a wonderful guy. He's in Redding, California, and I did a tutorial over there many years ago now, and Harold was just so hospitable to us. Was wonderful. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. We're all upside down at the moment. Todd's with us. Good to have you with us. Peter Mack, who's not the short-term trader, was very interested in the Danielcode. Good to have you with us, mate. Tom, of course, nice to have you with us. I've greeted Adrian. Jocelyn, welcome. Jocelyn, we don't have many lady traders, which is... I guess it's a culture thing, you know. Japan, which is the spiritual home of Forex trading, absolutely dominated by lady traders. And I always like to say a special welcome to any ladies. We don't have enough of them. Jen, great to have you with us. Greg, of course. Andrew, yes, we've done that. Norbert, we've said hello. Mark, he's a tutorial guy. Keep working on it, Mark. I know you're starting to despair that you'll ever remember those rules, but you will. Murph, who I had a long talk to yesterday, I think. Murph's been with us forever. He's a wonderful Danielcode supporter. And I'm going to talk a bit about the things that you and I talked about yesterday, Murph. Mark's with us. He's a tutorial guy. Sean, he's with us. Here we are. Ray, welcome. Juan, we haven't heard from you for a while. Juan, good to have you with us. Albert, of course, and John down in Coffs Harbour. As well as many others. Yes, hi to you, Juan. Good to hear from you. Okay, so let's move on, folks. So, oh boy, markets are just fun at the moment, aren't they? I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful time to be alive and have the opportunity of trading these great markets. So let's move on. You know that Danielcode organizes the markets. Markets are rational, orderly, and sometimes predictable. That's about as far as we go with that. So today we're going to talk a bit about the dangers of herding. And herding is, of course, such a human attribute. I must say that while we've been having the COVID pandemic ruling, a lot of the herding has been banned. A lot of the big rugby games, cricket, I guess, all the other sports that people play, they've turned out to be very effective spreaders of infection. In where I live at the beautiful Gold Coast, which I guess is Australia's sort of equivalent of Miami, but it's pretty, it's lovely, it's a wonderful tourist resort. But it's about 50% of what you'll see at Miami, but it's got all the positive attributes and fewer of the negative ones, which is great. And we've been totally protected here. We had 3 weeks total lockdown last year, and that's been it. The border's been closed. The infections have been raging in the southern states, New South Wales and Victoria. West Australia has been like us. It's had its borders closed, and of course, you know, there's two views on everything in life, and plenty of unhappy people about that. But the vast majority have been grateful for the protection. But it's all opening up pretty well. I think about 10 days' time. So we'll see what happens. The outbreaks are going to come, I guess. But anyway, we'll find out. We've been immune to a lot of this herding. It's been, I got to say, honestly, I mean, I'm not a shopper. I don't go out much at all. You know, if I need a shirt, Mrs. Needham will buy half a dozen, and that'll keep me going for a while. But I'm not a shopper, so I managed to avoid crowds pretty well. I'm happy sitting here with my charts and thinking about the Danielcode, which is always wonderful. But, you know, man is a social creature, and there's this huge propensity to herd at all times. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. So we see it everywhere, herding. This is herding in politics, which is of great interest to me. And of course, you can see this was a snap from the 6th January invasion of Congress, really, wasn't it? And this is a little welcome to Trump on his inauguration. We see we had some riots then, and that's all herding behaviour. And this by no means, it's not just specific to the United States, I promise you. These negative herding behaviour happens everywhere. And this is a picture from the recent French farmers' riot. I was looking to put a date on it, but it happens so often. It's a regular occurrence. Many of you won't know that the European Union originally started off as the European Steel Agreement, where there was a bit of rationalisation of tariffs, duties, etc., between France and Germany. And Germany went into the European Union largely to solve its conscience over its performance in the past, particularly its invasion of France and other parts of Europe, World War I, World War II. France went into the European Union firstly to try and control Germany to an extent, make it part of the issue instead of being an outlier against it, but also so that it could maintain its particular lifestyle. And those of you who haven't been to France, you've missed a great opportunity. It's a very, very picturesque country. It's really, truly beautiful. It's sort of up there with New Zealand and Ireland in sheer physical beauty. But it has a massive amount of farmers who farm in very, very small scale, totally and utterly uneconomic. And the vast majority of or a very large percentage, I should say, of the European budget goes on subsidies to French farmers to keep them on their farms with their small land holdings and small numbers of animals. But it's a very, very key social point in France, which is why the farmers periodically get upset about things, and government certainly listens to them. So we see this sort of herding behaviour, both positive and negative. And of course, you're subject to it. You may not think you are, but you are. And this leads us, amongst other things, to herding in politics and the issue with voting. Again, excuse me, the US doesn't have a monopoly on voting problems. This is Australia, one of our very, very skilled commentators, Alan Jones, who did his final show for Sky Television yesterday. He's always a man with superb backup, with incredible research resources. And he was telling us that at the last federal election here, 2019, there were 18,000 votes in the state of New South Wales that were marked multiple times. And New South Wales has a population of about 8 million. And some of these voters were marked up to 5 times. That is, that those named people voted more than once, some of them twice, some of them as up to 5 times, and quite a large number of them at 5 times. So it's worth thinking a bit about why. Why would this happen? If you're going to have all the inconvenience of going to vote anyway, why would you be voting in another name? Well, you can think about that, and if you, as I put at the bottom here, if you think of the most corrupt option, you're likely correct. It's all to do with fraud, and it's interesting that contiguously around the world, the left-wing parties, some of which are centre-left, no, not really far left, they're opposed to any controls over voting. And it just doesn't make sense to me. We have a situation in Australia, unlike you in the United States, where your voting rules are actually far more civilised because voting is optional, as it should be. In Australia, voting is compulsory. And if you don't vote, you get fined by the Electoral Commission. But it seems to me that the most fundamental right of being a citizen is to vote. We live in democracies, the vast majority of them, which is, of course, control of the people, by the people, and for the people. But it should only therefore follow that it's the people, the recognized citizens of the country, that get that most important of democratic rights, and that is to vote for your leaders, vote for the rulers that are going to be running your lives for the next 3 or 4 years. And it's beyond me why the opposite parties are so opposed to it. Logically, you would think that that was a right for a citizen that should be seriously protected. But even though we've had for many, many years in this country, at least a convention that you produce your ID. I know whenever I vote, first thing you do is show them your photo ID, your driver's license or something. And there are some arguments against that. What I didn't know is that 1 in 6 people in this state of Queensland don't have a birth certificate. And that's a real anomaly. And sometimes we take things for granted in our modern world and think, well, sure, they have a birth certificate, but 1 in 6 don't. And we have a lot of spread out living places here, particularly further north, particularly with the indigenous people. They too are very tribal, and they don't have any great concern about those matters. But there are a whole lot of people who don't have ID, and the proposed legislation the federal government is going to bring in Australia does allow for somebody to be able to identify you. So the greatest argument against it is that it disenfranchises people, but if it was a properly worded piece of legislation, you'd be able to overcome that quite simply. But it is a very, very big issue, and I don't know why more thought and discussion isn't given to it. So talking about voting and the issues in the States, I'm a great lover of the States, and I lived there for a while, soon after I became a lawyer. And this is a photo of one of the Tidewater ships. Tidewater Marine's a public company in America and based in New Orleans. And they run, I think, probably the biggest offshore fleet in the world, together with their partner parents. But they run these supply ships that You can see one here. This is actually a tug. It's towing one of the oil rigs on or onto location or taking it somewhere else. So they have offshore tugs. They used to have onshore tugs where I worked for a while, and they have the main business is the supply ships that tow that take uh, the mud, as they call it, which is a barytic solution that's pumped down the oil wells as they're being drilled to force the drill bit to go deeper, and they shuttle the varieties of the supplies, the food, everything else you need on an oil rig, and the pipe, the drill pipe as well. And they're working all over the world. Crew boats as well. Wonderful, wonderful business, Tidewater. And back in the day, my father, who owned the Manly ferries in Sydney, or more properly, I should say, he was managing director of the company that owned the Manly ferries and a large shareholder. He very presciently decided that Australia was going to have to do something about offshore oil exploration, particularly in the Bass Strait, which is down south. And being a smart guy, he said, let's go to the world's leaders in this and do a joint venture so that they can give us all their expertise. So he did that, and for many years, Tidewater Marine and Port Jackson Manly Steamship Company, as it was called, had a joint venture building and running these supply ships down in the Australian Gulf. And in fact, the Bass Number One, the first offshore oil ever found in Australia, that was the Tidewater Port Jackson Manly ferry. There was a joint venture. Were the supply boats that serviced the SO rig that found that first offshore oil in Australia. And in fact, my father, being an old seafarer, was a British naval officer by his most of his life, as well as a naval architect, and he wanted to be buried at sea. So his ashes are actually 1 nautical mile northwest of the Marlin Number One platform down in the Bass Strait, which was the first commercial offshore oil found in Australia. So continuing the story, he wanted me to go into the business at that stage, and I was a young, about to become lawyer, and to become a attorney, as the Americans would call it, in Australia. It varies slightly state by state, but very little. You go to the court, and the full bench usually assembles for these presentations, and the full bench of the justices come in with their ermine cloaks and scarlet gowns and wigs, long wigs, full wigs, bell wigs, right down to the shoulder. Magnificent sight. And I remember for me, this was in the Danielcode Court of the Supreme Court of New South Wales, which was a wonderful, wonderful historic building, and the panoply and the ceremony involved. I mean, it was wonderful. But what actually happened is that my father wanted me to go into the business at that stage, and he'd arranged with Tidewater for me to spend a year with them in the States, and to go around all of their various operations and get familiar with it. And that ranged from inshore tugs pushing barges up the Mississippi up to Vicksburg and past, the offshore supply ships, the offshore tugs, the crew boats, everything you could think of, all based on. Part I was concerned with was based with at Morgan City, down in the bayou country of Louisiana. Wonderful, wonderful place, let me tell you. If you've never had Kunas food, as they call it, Cajun food, you haven't lived. Crawfish pie, shrimp, gumbo. Oh, just loved it. I just got to tell you, I was about to turn 21, and I had my law degree in my pocket. I was a single young man, and New Orleans and some of those other communities down in the South, they really are absolute heaven for a young man. So anyway, the issue was that back in the day, you to become an attorney, you had to comply with the Legal Practitioners Act, the legislative requirements to be a lawyer. And one of the provisions of that is that you had to be 21. And I wasn't. I was 20 something, and I'd finished my degree. I'd met all the requirements, including back in the day, you had to spend a year. I spent 5 years as what's called an article clerk, which was really a certificate of indenture. It was the old British servant's document, really, that you bound yourself to a master solicitor, if you could find one. The expression lawyers in Australia are admitted as solicitors, attorneys, and proctors of the relevant court. Solicitor is a word that encompasses a division of the legal profession in Australia and most Commonwealth countries, not an expression you hear very often in the United States, so where attorney is the dominant word. But nonetheless, you are admitted as a solicitor, attorney, and proctor of the Supreme Court once you've met all the requirements. But I hadn't met the requirements. I was too young. So we had to make an application to the court, a formal application, to allow myself to be admitted as an attorney before the age of 21. And we made that application in court, and it was duly granted. And I became the youngest attorney in New South Wales ever. For that time, I'm sure it's been done again since. But the other wonderful thing about the Legal Practitioners Act is it created you a gentleman. Once you'd been admitted, you became a gentleman under the provisions of the Parliamentary Act. And in this process of actually being an article clerk for 5 years, which was working in a lawyer's office and seeing how everything happened, where were all the documents, where were the filing points, where were the various courts, all of that practical information. You got that by doing what was called your articles of clerkship. It's all gone now. These days, lawyers get their degree out of the cornflakes packet, as far as I can see. There's too many of them, and to my point of view, it's a very poor substitute for the system we had. But the system we had relied on the fact of a senior lawyer being prepared to take you on, and having a young man or lady. Not so many of them did law in those days. Today, it's a real matriarchal society. But back in the day, you had to find a lawyer who was willing to take you on and spend a whole lot of his time teaching you. And a whole lot of lawyers didn't want to do that. But I was blessed. One of my father's great friends was a wonderful gentleman, Roscoe W.G. Hoyle. The W.G. stood for William Giles Hoyle, and he was a character. In fact, he was a famous character because he had the great distinction of being the first person to ever cross the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And for those of you who've ever seen a photo of Sydney, you'll know that it's a magnificent structure, one of the great wonders of Sydney, a beautiful bridge. And Roscoe and his pal were officially the first people to cross the Sydney Harbour Bridge. But the great issue in that, it was a little more exciting than you think, because they did it by jumping across the gap on the top span before the final span had been put in. So this bridge was being built, an enormous structure, and the top span hadn't been put in, so there was a gap of about 6 feet. And you are, hundreds of feet up in the air. If you fall from that, you're dead. That's really simple. But Roscoe, back in his day, was a real man around town, a lad around town, you might say. Wonderful, wonderful rugby man. And his great pal was another young lawyer called Bill Dovey. And Bill Dovey went on to become Mr. Justice Dovey, and he became the head of the Supreme Court in its matrimonial division. He became the chief of the divorce court, if you like. And his daughter went on, and she actually married Gough Whitlam. Margaret, I think her name was. This is all back in the day. And Gough Whitlam was one of Australia's prime ministers, a very dynamic character. Gough, I had the pleasure of knowing him and knowing his family particularly well. I played rugby with one of his sons, and he was a very, very clever man. but he was a political opportunist. He became Prime Minister, and he was a member of the Australian Labor Party, which is effectively your Democrats, if you like. But Gough was a Labor man about as much as I am, which is not much at all. But he was saw the opportunity with his intellect and dynamism to dominate that party, which he did. And he's a very historic figure. Anyway, the time came, and the court allowed me to be admitted. So I became a solicitor, attorney, and proctor of the Supreme Court of New South Wales before the age of 21. And I duly jumped on a plane and turned up in New Orleans, where Tidewater sort of took me under their wing, and I had 2 or 3 months working for their attorneys, Phelps Dunbar. A month up in Peoria, Illinois, where the Caterpillar factory was. They made all the engines for these big ships. Galveston, Morgan City, very wonderful times in Bayou Buff, and that culture of the people who live by the rivers, wonderful, salt of the earth. But in the process of all of that, I can tell you, as well as driving the inshore tugs up to Vicksburg and past it with the barges, and delivering some of the offshore ships. I had the most wonderful to Singapore. I did a couple of deliveries from New Orleans. I had the most wonderful time of my life. And I became very familiar with whole groups of these people. And America, for those who don't know, states' rights is a big deal, and people identify themselves with their state. The most famous example, of course, is the historical leader of the Confederacy, General Robert E. Lee, who was a very, very senior man in the Army prior to the Civil War. And he was actually offered command of the Union forces. But he said, I can't do that because my loyalty must and always will be to Virginia. So that's how he became the general of the Confederate Army, with his devotion to his state. And there's a whole lot of that sentiment still alive and working well in America. The upshot of all of that is I became very familiar with lots of these communities, traveling around, working on supply boats and tugs and everything else. And I understand how easy it is to manipulate votes with a whole lot of very, very decent people who have absolutely no interest in federal politics. And the laws in America make it quite legal to bundle, to go and collect votes from all sorts of people. Maybe you give them a case of beer or something, and they make their mark or sign the electoral form, and you then deliver it. And that was done en masse in the last federal election in the States. And, of course, it's been done many, many times before. And as I say, it's not unique to the US by any means. It happens in this country and elsewhere as well. So this is a real problem, voting rights, and it's something that should concern you. Anyway, let's move on with that. And this is one of their onshore tugs. These are amazing-looking boats. They're actually got a marine-type profile under the water, but the top of the water, it's a flat face on them because they're pushing these barges, some of which, if you've ever seen it, I mean, it's an extraordinary skillful job. And of course, the thing is that the Mississippi's moving all the time. Sandbars come and go and disappear, and the Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Corps of Engineers, they just do sensational work keeping everything up there and moving. So we're talking about this herd behavior. So you see it so clearly in politics, and particularly in American politics, because Americans are interested in politics, and it gets a tremendous amount of media coverage. Whereas in Australia and New Zealand, we're pretty apathetic. I often say if we didn't have to vote by compulsion, there'd be 10 men who'd pass a vote. Nobody cares passionately about anything to do with politics in this part of the world, whereas in America, the herd is split passionately. So we're seeing a great example at the moment of how the herd's going to find a resolution. You've got on one side, you've got Bernie Sanders, more about him later, AOC and her cohort, Greta, belting the drum about global warming, and then on the other hand, you've got Joe Manchin, who's a holdout senator in the United States Senate. Now, senators in America are very, very important people. It's very hard to get yourself elected as a senator, and they have enormous power and enormous responsibilities. One vote can stop a bill even coming to the floor, or they can put a hold on any nominations to government positions. But they are very, very important people, very powerful people. And you can see how emotional this is all getting. To give you the short version of the backdrop, the left-wing part of American politics, which is basically the Democratic Party, has got power. It got the majority in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and of course Joe Biden, the president. And they've come up with this extraordinary wish list of all the things they'd like to do, being pushed by AOC and Bernie, and of course a big environmental flavor to it, with little Greta beating the drum in UK this week, where they've been having the latest conference on environmental issues and global warming. More on that later as well. But interesting that Manchin and the Senate, I should say, is split even numbers both sides, Democrats and Republicans. So Democrats are in the process of trying to bring in this incredible legislation, which really is just a wish list of everything that they could have thought up, but with no concern for funding. And Manchin, who is number 49 on the, or 50 in fact, on the Democratic side of the Senate, he's speaking with enormous common sense. He's saying it's too much money, $3.5 trillion. Don't worry about the B's for billion, $3.5 trillion of new programs. And as Manchin's pointed out, the steps that have been taken supposedly to fund it in America, they're called pay for the legislation. They're a total joke. Manchin's enlightened them to a shell game. We'll cost this thing for 5 years, and if that's too much and we've got to reduce it, we'll just fund it for 2 years, knowing perfectly well that there's a very, very high probability it will be extended. So right now, the United States has major social programs that are coming to the end of their funding life. And there's no arrangements to go on funding these most important, Medicaid, one of them, all sorts of important programs. So what Manchin is saying is we can't even fund what we've got in place, yet we're going to throw another $3.5 trillion onto our debt. Incredible. And don't forget, inflation is behind all of this. Inflation now has jumped to a 3-decade high in the States. Wages haven't kept pace. Prices for food, gas, and rent, they're not rising, they're roaring. I went to fill one of our cars last week, and all the years I've had it, and its brothers and sisters, I've never put more than $75 of gas in it. It's a 3 Series BMW. All of a sudden, it's $127, close to double the price of petrol in this country. Well, we have a whole lot of taxes on petrol here that you don't have in the States, but nonetheless, petrol prices around the world are going through the roof. Rent's the same, apparently, and all of this is an economic burden. So some of you might remember those of you who regularly come to my webinars, I was going to say maybe even 3 or 4, as far back as 5 months ago, at one of my webinars, I told you that I thought retail inflation was running at 14%. Now, up to that stage, no one had talked about inflation for years. It used to be a big boogeyman. It seemed to have disappeared because there was no wage inflation. But there's plenty of other sorts of inflation. So I made that statement, and the very next day I read or scan 7 newspapers or websites every day, try and keep up with what's happening in various parts of the world. And the very next day after I made that comment at the Danielcode webinar, there were no less than 5 articles about inflation in those publications. And it all took off from there. So inflation is just a huge, huge problem. And there's absolutely no indication that government in the United States, at least, and probably everywhere else as well, to be fair, they haven't got a clue about it. They don't know what to do, and if they do know, they're not prepared to take the steps to tame it. But inflation's an awful thing because it's a hidden tax, and it's a tax on consumers. That's what it is. And you'll be feeling it if you've done some shopping lately, filled up your cars. You will know just how dreadful inflation can be. So Manchin, I think he's positioning himself to run as a Democratic candidate for president. And he's certainly being very responsible, very rational. As he said, he won't support the $3.5 trillion bill or anywhere near that. Greater clarity about why Congress chooses to ignore the serious effects inflation and debt have on existing government programs. And as he says, it's even more important now the Social Security and Medicare trustees have sounded the alarm that these life-saving programs will be insolvent and benefits could start to be reduced as soon as 2026. Well, these are bedrock parts of the United States health program, which is pretty patchy at best, and some of these are just vital for survival, quite literally. And then he went on to say, as more of the real details outlined in the basic framework are released, what I see are shell games, budget gimmicks that make the real cost of the so-called 1.75 trillion bill estimated to be almost twice that amount. So that's a comment in relation to the White House's new level. They're giving the appearance that they're reducing this particular bit of legislation to 1.75 trillion from 3.5 trillion, do you mind? But in fact, they haven't, as Manchin pointed out. It's all shell games and budget trickery. And of course, yeah, right, US Reserve continues to maintain that inflation is transitory, which it's not. That's the good news. So on the other side of this argument, you've got Bernie. And if you don't follow American politics, it's hard to comprehend some of these characters. And Bernie, in my view, is very probably an old commie. He had his honeymoon in Russia, and he describes himself as an independent socialist. But he's got enormous power, even though he's only one man, and he's not even officially part of the Democratic Party. He's an independent. But he's very much running the roost for the Democratic push for this extraordinary, huge piece of legislation. And it's confusing, but we won't go into the detail because there's another bit of legislation being considered at the same time. I won't go into all of that. It'll just simply confuse everyone. But Bernie Sanders is a senator from Vermont, and he's been a very long-term member of the Senate. And generally, until this current iteration of Biden's presidency, the general comment about Bernie Sanders is a bit of a crackpot. But he had great appeal to young people. And in the last election, 2016, 19 election, when Joe Biden got elected. Here we are, Suicini. Sorry for being that. That's fine, mate. We had to clean up after dinner, don't we all? Well done. And so what happened is that Biden was running in the primaries along with the dreaded Kamala and Bernie and a few other also ran. And Biden was doing dreadfully in the early primaries. He wasn't getting in the first three. His name didn't get published. He wasn't landing in the first three. Kamala, who I thought would be an attractive candidate, turned out not to be. She was about the same boat as Bernie, couldn't get 1% in the whole of these primaries. But the guy who was doing so well in these primaries was Bernie Sanders. And he's a real revolutionary. He's died in the wool socialist. And he attracted a huge following of young people. And the argument goes back to the election before that, when Trump beat Hillary, that Sanders, even for that election, had a substantial following, and he didn't get it to get behind Hillary. And that's one of the many excuses that we used for her not getting elected. But nonetheless, in the early stage of the primaries as they developed, here's Joe Biden getting no support at all. Kamala getting no support at all. And the standout potential candidate is Bernie Sanders, with his legions of young people supporting his views. So Obama, who still effectively dominates the Democratic Party, did a deal. And the deal happened after the primary in South Carolina. And that's the first time that Biden came alive. He got a massive, massive vote, all the black vote. And Obama understood better than anyone that Democrats weren't going to win a presidential election unless they had the black vote and they motivated the black vote. And the only guy who had support in the black community who was standing in the primaries was Joe Biden. But then they had this problem: how do we attract Bernie Sanders? Well, it's been reported that Sanders and Biden got together at Obama's urging, and Sanders came up with a list of, don't quote me on this, but it'll give you the flavor. I think it was like 116 separate issues that he wanted accommodation on. And Biden eventually agreed to the vast majority of them, and that ensured that Bernie would get behind the push for Joe Biden and make a real effort to get his people to vote in the presidential elections and the other elections that go with it, which he did. So by Obama's management of the situation, Bernie Sanders went from an insignificant crackpot to a very, very important person. And that is why you see him effectively leading the push for this democratic legislation. Quite weird. And you can see his statement here that the infrastructure bill, this was Bernie, it runs to 250 billion and it's going to create a deficit. And both parties support that wholeheartedly. It's an infrastructure bill. It's building bridges, roads, all sorts of infrastructure. And you can see at the bottom here, Joe Manchin's opposition to the Build Back Better Act. It said it was, this was Cori Bush. She said it was anti-black, anti-child, anti-woman, and anti-immigrant. And she said Manchin does not get to dictate the future of our country. Well, you should hope that he does, because the alternative is pretty awful. And that's progressing every day as we speak. I think the old duck, the speaker, is going to try to hold a vote this week. Okay, so let's try and get this wrapped up for you. What the Democrats have asked for is effectively a children's Christmas wish list. You've got greater who has really, I call this a manufactured emergency. Those of you who remember the Y2K issue, I mean, billions and billions of dollars were spent in trying to avoid the end of the world because the calendar wasn't going to roll over to 2000. And massive whole businesses were dedicated to planning for this supposed emergency. It was just another furphy. A whole lot of people made a whole lot of money out of it, and the government paid. So this issue with Greta, who's the young lady beating the drum on the greenhouse gas issue, is a totally manufactured emergency. She emerged sailing on a yacht from Europe, where she lives. She was a young lady. I think she might have been 14 and 15 at the time, maybe younger. And she was sailed on a yacht crewed by a professional crew. Very, very expensive yacht it was too, across the Atlantic to arrive in New York in time to address the United Nations. Well, none of this happens by accident. You don't walk into the United Nations and say, hey, I've got a good idea, I want to talk to you. This was all manufactured. It was supported by, it started off with the European media. It spread to the American continent, US, Canada media, and it became a total media show, and it's still going on. And Prince Charles, the heir to the British crown, he has always been an environmentalist, but to a very extreme level, and he's infected his son, young Prince William, with it. And honestly, these people are nutters. This whole COP32, whichever it was, is about, why is it supported by so many countries and people? It's about massive, massive transfers of wealth from the developed world to the developing world. Now think about that, and think about this. China is considered part of the developing world. Do you get that? There is billions and maybe trillions of dollars at stake. And that's what's really behind it all. Like most things, it's money. And sure, there's a need to clean up the planet. Sure, there's a need to try and control some of these noxious gases, but it's got to be done in a sensible way. And the first thing that's got to happen, someone's got to tell us what all this is going to cost and who's going to pay for it. It can't just be left as it is, with Charles saying, private entrepreneurs will get behind this, they'll fund it. I don't think so. And then, of course, they're just acting as children, making out their wish list of what they want. And starts off with John Kerry, who is the environmental Green the World ambassador for the Biden administration. This guy's married to one of the richest women in the world. She's the Heinz baked beans heiress. He goes to the meetings in his private jet. Don't worry about pollution. Goodness me, he's a total hypocrite. And just one of those political creatures who can't bear not being in the limelight. And so you've got Bernie coming up. This all started straight after the election. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and her fellow travelers came up with the Green New Deal. Never heard of anything that stupid in your life. But they pushed it. The media's gone nuts over it. On and on it goes. And, the wish list, the billion for environmental causes, who's going to pay for it? At the moment, everyone assumes the government's going to pay for it. But the government, folks, is you. It's your taxes. Governments don't earn any money. They spend money. They spend your money. That's where the money comes from. Now, thankfully, we've got a couple of adults in the situation. One is Joe Manchin, who's behaving like an adult. And I was talking to Murph during the week, and I was saying to him, it's absolutely incredible to me that you can have 49 highly, highly capable people to become a senator in the United States is a seriously big deal. And idiots don't get there. And you've got 49 Democrat senators beating the drum for this supposed $3.5 trillion bill. I mean, this is a country like the rest of the world's up to its neck in debt. They have great problems getting what they call the pay-fors. The minute they say they're going to tax any particular segment, that's howled down, or the lobbyists will shift it off. And it's just a ridiculous situation. In Australia, thankfully, we have Barnaby Joyce, the former head of the National Party. That's the country party it used to be called. Really represents rural people. It's part of the coalition of government in Australia. Liberal Party, nothing liberal about it. It's actually the Conservative Party. It's called the Liberal Party. And the National Party, the old country party, are in coalition in government. And Barnaby was the leader of the National Party and then lost his position. He got caught in playing something under the table with one of the young news journalists in Canberra, and got her pregnant and had a baby. He was already married with 4 adult children, daughters, lovely people. So he got the sack for offending the morals of a whole lot of people who have nothing really to do with any of it. And he came back just recently because the guy they had leading the National Party was a bit weak. And Barnaby is a strong man, good operator for the for his electorate, for his supporters. So we've got a couple of adults, but that's about all. And it's just really just ridiculous what's going on with these games at the moment. So let's talk a bit about herding in financial markets. Kind of interesting, isn't it, that the central banks all talk to each other in great detail. And interest rates started edging up last week when New Zealand abandoned its QE and started to increase interest rates, then Australia, then all sorts of other places. And one of the things that happened right at the beginning of this was that a large part of the herd, a large part of asset managers who trade in bonds, they had a wrong way bet. And it triggered Rocos and Alpha-Dyne losses in particular. This is from Bloomberg. And this actually played out, I'm going to show you how it worked in America, but it actually played out mainly on British UK bonds and gilts, as they call them. And 2 of the big name hedge funds, Rocos and Alpha-Dyne, had very, very substantial losses. And there's a whole lot of others as well. Zero Hedge claims that 10 to 20 of some of the biggest investors in that market have had losses so substantial they're going to be wiped out. Now, of course, the media's already jumped to hush that up as much as possible. Bloomberg, in particular, always puts a very positive spin on anything to do with markets. But central banks generally, they're withdrawing this so-called emergency stimulus. And the Australian Reserve Bank failed to support the April 2024 bond that went from its sort of stated number, the steered number towards that 0.1%, up 800 points. Quite extraordinary, happened in 2 days. So you can see that Norway, Brazil, Mexico, South Korea, New Zealand, and now Australia, of course, among those who have already raised interest rates. And don't forget about hypothecation. Hypothecation means that when an asset's already been encumbered with a charge of some sort, it can be traded subject to that charge and finish up having a further debt to someone else, an entity. And hypothecation at the levels we're talking about here in the bond market, hypothecation's everywhere. I'm not sure that anyone really knows where any of these supposed assets are. It's a very, very dangerous position. And it is dangerous. And we're going to have some effect fairly soon. Barnaby Joyce is a clown, says Mr. McCain, who has left. Well, there you go. You see, you can say something nice about someone, immediately someone else will jump in and say he's an idiot. So I guess it depends on your political persuasion. Of course, those of the centre and the left, they hate Barnaby because he's working very much solely for his traditional base, who are country people, very important country people. I pulled a few charts off quite quickly. I'm not going to dwell on this because time is running short, and I thank you for bearing with me as I've given you my views on the status of the world. But I wanted you to just take a note that no matter how dynamic and markets get, and let me tell you, if you didn't know how to trade an outside bar before yesterday, and you're a Forex trader, you certainly got your head handed to you. And I've often told you that if you have an outside bar, you must stop and reverse, because outside bars tend to be momentum indicators. We've talked about this at length. And as well as that, you can see that there's an extension of the outside bar theory, which can run up to 3 days, which is the failure point, which I'll touch on briefly here. But have a look at this. Here's an exciting night for the Aussie dollar. It rallied, then it turned around and dived down. Pretty volatile. Have a look at this. What was the close? 7401. What was the Danielcode number there? 7407. 6 ticks away with all that volatility. Pretty marvelous, isn't it? This is Canadian dollar chief, Swiss franc pair. Same sort of thing. Plenty of drama last night. Outside bar. Where did it close? This stuff is not random, folks. It doesn't even. It only appears to be random if you don't know anything about trading. But you can see that close of that. We're on CAD chief. Here we are, the close on the black line, 73.25. Pretty extraordinary stuff, isn't it? The close was actually 73.28, 3 ticks variance. So you get the message. I'll punch a few more past you. Here's another one. This is British pound, Japanese yen. This was a big bar, huge volatility, massive volatility. Where did it stop? The low, 153.124. Where's the blue line? 153.044. Where was the close? 153.124. Where's the Danielcode number? 153.456. Extraordinary stuff, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, that was that one. Let's move on. This is just to give you a flavour, folks. And this, of course, British pound, US dollar, the so-called cable. Cable was frantic last night. Really was. And I can tell you that, look where it settled for the day of great drama. The close was 13501. Where's the Danielcode blue line? 13499. 2 ticks variance. That's been on the chart for weeks and weeks. For those of you who don't know, Danielcode members charts give you all of these numbers and continue to show you the support and resistance levels, which are unlike any other that you've ever seen. And the point I'm making is how closely markets actually follow the Danielcode. Here's another one. This is oil. I won't be much longer on this stuff, folks. I know I've made the point. I think here's oil. Big dynamic day down on 2 sell signals. And it closed at 78.81. Where's the Danielcode number? 78.86. 5 ticks variance. Okay. Now, S&P. Trade the market, not the forecast. We've had a bit of a fuffle lately about people who've been following the fourth seal. And yes, you should be following the fourth seal, but you must trade the market, not the forecast. This was the S&P last night, and there's something rather interesting about this. There's the close in a particularly dynamic session. The bar doesn't look that big, but I can tell you it was churned left, right, and center. And there's the close yesterday. Well, today for you in America, I'm half a day ahead of you. 46.72, 3/4. Where's the Danielcode number? 46.71 and 46.74. Marvelous stuff, isn't it? Now, Next thing on our interest is correlations. You remember I've talked to you in the past about markets that are correlated. Gold and silver and the Huey index are so correlated that a Danielcode signal in any one can be traded in any other. And yesterday we had a TO3 and a blue lie buy in silver, which I'll show you. This was the correlated trade. If we were able to take that trade in gold, if you wish. I know a lot of you gold traders. Look where that bar stopped. Lots of drama in that bar, I can assure you. And there was the Danielcode red line, 1800.6. The high, 1800.3. 3 ticks variance in all that volatility. Extraordinary stuff, isn't it? All right. So this was the buy in silver. This was a TO3 buy and a blue line buy. That's the strongest buy signal we have. So silver took off. There was no signal in gold, in price at least. There was, of course, a time buy signal for gold. It's on top of everything all the time. But there's the correlated buy. Think about that, because you're missing a great opportunity if you don't. Think about how many of the Forex pairs are correlated, and a whole lot of them are correlated. But gold, silver, and Huey, they are very, very highly correlated, and often, the vast majority of the time, and certainly recently, gold is inversely correlated with the US dollar index. So dollar up, gold down. Dollar down, gold up. Doesn't happen all the time, but that's been the pattern now for many months. That broke last night pretty dramatically because you had a massive up bar in the US dollar, and gold rallied at the same time. And that's a whole new subject, and it's really, really interesting. Okay, let's finish this up. We should move on. DAX is at the blue line signal. It's given us a blue line sell 2 days in a row. S&P's at the blue line signal. Russell's just moved into its blue line sell. Dow already pulled back yesterday, or today for you, Thursday. NASDAQ, completely ignoring all the other markets, charging on its own way. Friday is the most bullish, seasonally most bullish day of the week. Be really, really interesting if a sell signal is elected tonight. The signals are there to be really interesting. Here's the Russell today, tagging its blue line. You can see that, and we can tell you the relevant numbers there. Today's high in the Russell, 2424.8. Where's the Danielcode blue line? 2434. Sorry, 2423.4 against the actual high, 2424.8. About an 8-tick variance, isn't it? Amazing stuff. Right, keep watching. We move along. The out of consensus bond trade. This was what triggered a whole lot of the dramas, and I repeat that most of this stuff was happening based on British bonds, but you can see the same thing happening in the US. The low of that bar, it's got a TO3 buy signal on it, was October the 21st, and we had a TO3 buy signal there that went straight up 1, 2, 3, 4.5 days, and that was the push-up that destroyed the bet, is the word that Bloomberg used. It is a betting game for the big hedge funds that got it the wrong way, because they were all expecting bonds to weaken, and they didn't. They strengthened. Now look what's happened since then. Have a look at the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. They're holding that support at 159.16 and then 159.17. There are 2 Danielcode red lines in there. Why are they doing that? This is all the wrong way if you think about it. Bonds up on the T-bond chart means interest rates down. Well, that's the opposite of what the central banks have been saying. Central banks have been taking away a lot of the additional support, cutting back on QE or abandoning it, as Canada's done. With what all the central banks have told us is happening over the last week is interest rates up. In other words, bond market should be going down, and it's not. What's it doing? It's holding there long enough to finish punishing all of those massive bets from asset managers that were the wrong way in T-bond. And it will continue to hold up there until it's punished them enough to shake them out of the market. And that's what the market does. It's brutal, and it's exactly what markets do all the time. Okay, so let's move on. This is the same trade for those of you who had trouble finding it. The buy that was elected, the TO3 buy signal, was created October 21st. That was the Thursday. Trade was elected on Friday, and at the close of Friday's bar, the trend was up. If you weren't able to make that assumption yourself, and I know some of our members didn't, rework your analysis. You should have known by the end of Friday's bar, October 22nd, that the probable trend was up, and that's why you held that trade on it. Okay, remember, this is an old chart. I'm repeating what I've told you before. Trade the market, not the forecast. The 4 Seal forecast is based on 6-day, 12-day, and 24-day charts. You can't trade those charts. The risk is on entry is out of all proportion to your risk management profile. So trade the market, not the forecast. Okay, which is just a little quite quick note to you Forex traders. You had this is happens to be Euro, British pound. You had a TO3 buy signal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 days ago. That trade was elected. It ran up into a TO3 sell signal 2 days ago. That trade was elected, and it left you sitting there with 1 bar down in an uptrend. Now, if you get a 1 bar, that makes by definition a counter trend. A 1 bar counter trend, you have permission to buy that bar to get back with the trend. 1 or 2 or 3 bar counter trend, or an inside bar, or a key reversal bar in the direction of the trend. You should remember that. I've talked about it often, and I teach it for those of you who do a tutorial. Every Danielcode signal, they are so specific that they create the point at which the trade will be elected. They tell you what the initial stop loss will be, and they all create a failure point. And if that failure point is breached, you are wrong, and you need to stop and reverse and go the other way. And you have 3 reasons for that on this chart: a 1 bar counter trend, an outside day where that protocol always applies, and of course it was a Danielcode time signal buy for those of you that are trading time. So here's the power of the herds, guys. This is a marvelous photo of bison being stampeding themselves in Yellowstone Park and charging right past a herd of buffalo bison passing a number of cars. Panicked herds are dangerous to your wealth because herds, when panicked, run further and faster than you can imagine, and that's why markets always overshoot at both ends. So make sure, folks, you're not like this lion who's about to cop terrible pain, which is what happens to people who get caught the wrong way in financial markets. Be nimble, keep your eyes open, follow the Danielcode. It will keep you safe. This is the consequence of getting the wrong way in herd behavior. Okay, so that's it for the time being, folks. I've gone a bit over time, for which I apologize. I did love it. I enjoy our chat so much, Ben. I've got a few questions. I'll come back to them. We offer you the Danielcode tutorial, teach you everything that I do in these webinars for Forex trading, Forex and futures. And if you want to be a super trader and become a very, very good trader, I can get you there. Email me, jneedham@thedanielcode.com. Let me know you're interested in learning to be an excellent trader. I'll send you some paperwork on the Danielcode tutorial, and then I can contact you however you wish after that. Remember, the business of trading is making money. It may all sound theoretical. It's not. It's making the bucks. What pays the bills? That's why we do it. If you haven't already, folks, and I see we've got a number of new members with it, or new people today with new names, you're welcome to have a free trial. Go to the Danielcode website, www.thedanielcode.com. Start your free trial, hit the register button. Any problems with that, contact Terry at support@thedanielcode.com. Most importantly, pay attention to the disclaimer. It is very, very easy to lose money trading if you are not a highly competent trader. Do not, I beg you, implore you, trade real money until you are confident that you are a safe and profitable trader. Okay, so that's the end of the webinar. I've got a few questions I need to deal with. Adrian, is it a good time to fix interest rates, Adrian? Probably. A couple of months ago was better. Ben, obviously we have to trade the market. What's your opinion on equities in the big picture? Seems to have many headwinds, but it's chugging right along for now. Well, that's always the quandary, Ben. You got to trade. Just before the big 2008, 2009 disasters for Merrill Lynch and a few of the others, Prince, I think his name was, he was the head of one of the very big New York firms, said, you got to dance. The music's still playing and you got to dance until the music stops. Question is, if you're a long-term trader, you're not nimble enough to get out of the way. That photo of the lion in front of the herd of water buffalo, he's pretty nimble. He actually got away. There's another part of that photo that shows him skirting around the side. But you've got to be fast. If you're trading the Daniel code, we're fast. We're close to the market. Follow the Daniel code and you'll be safe and you'll make the money. Okay, that's it. I should add, welcome all the new people who've come on board a bit late here. Matt, of course, Suhasini, lovely to have you with us there. Rolf down in Melbourne. Mike Mitsos, the Phantom Trading dentist up in Chicago. And many more. Anthony D, good to have you with us, mate. So thank you for being with us, folks. I hope you found this interesting. Anything you'd like me to talk about particularly, shoot me an email and I'll be sure to be prepared to talk about it at the next webinar, which will be in a fortnight, which is 2 weeks. Fortnight short for 14 nights or 2 weeks. An expression we use, not used in America, but Greg Young's son knows about it. Okay, Suhasini, doing well trading. Thanks for everything. Upgrading to more than one 6S sub 6S has done a nice job this week, hasn't it? You've got at the close today 4,800 in the S&P Mini, 1,500 in natural gas, 5,000 in the Russell, and some others as well. Wonderful stuff. Great pleasure to be alive and to be with you. Okay, Rolf, interested in our thoughts about Fibonacci next time. Is that Fibonacci you mean, mate? Take Fibonacci is, yes, you meant Fibonacci. I'll tell you all about it, Rolf. It's an interesting story, and it has to do with the fecundity or the breeding habit of rabbits. And I'll certainly tell you all about that next time. In the meantime, folks, enjoy your coming weekend. And do please email me if there are any items you would like me to deal with next time. Harold, wonderful to have you with us. I hope your health is wonderful. I hope your happiness is at the same level. Take care, my friend. Pleasure to have you on board with us, Harold. All the best for now. Bye-bye.